Today, we're exploring a gripping and tragic story that begins with courage and loyalty and ends in heartbreak. It's the tale of two brothers, both firefighters, both hailed as local heroes. One once risked his life to save the other from a collapsing inferno. For years, they stood side by side on the front lines, raised their families in the same neighborhood, and shared an unbreakable bond. But beneath the surface, something was unraveling. What should have been a simple weekend getaway turned into something no one could have foreseen, leaving one brother dead in the woods and a family forever broken. The story first entered public awareness on January 17, 2018, just before 3 a.m., when emergency dispatch received a call about a fire at an abandoned textile warehouse near Murphy Avenue, SW in southwest Atlanta. The property had stood unused since 2003 and had become notorious for illegal entry and unsafe conditions. Just 2 minutes after the initial call, multiple reports confirmed large flames and dense smoke pouring from the upper levels. Even before crews arrived, the blaze was classified as a 4-alarm fire. Engine 11, responding from Station 14 on Metropolitan Parkway, was among the first units to arrive. Aboard were two men well known to the department, Captain Kevin Anthony James, 30, and his younger brother Trey Dunell James, 26, both Atlanta fire rescue veterans, both admired by their peers. Since 2015, the two had worked together out of the same station. Kevin had taken on a leadership role after his promotion in 2016, and internal evaluations described the brothers as steady under pressure and highly effective as a team. But this fire was different. Investigators later discovered that a broken natural gas line on the building's south side had likely triggered the fire and fueled its rapid expansion. By 3:15 a.m., the upper levels were structurally compromised and on the verge of collapse. At 3:11 a.m., Captain Kevin James entered the warehouse with a crew tasked with searching the second floor. Moments later, disaster struck. A steel beam inside gave way, trapping him beneath heavy debris. At 3:17 a.m., he radioed a mayday. His air supply was running low and he couldn't free himself. Command immediately called for all teams to evacuate the building and await a specially equipped rescue unit. The structure was too dangerous for standard re-entry. But Trey James didn't wait. At 3:20 a.m., against orders, he entered the building from a side door on the eastern wall, armed with only a flashlight and a crowbar. No radio communication was logged from him during this unauthorized move. But post-incident analysis later pieced together what happened. In complete darkness, Trey advanced nearly 45 feet through unstable wreckage to reach his brother, who was barely conscious and suffering from severe smoke exposure. Trey used the crowbar to dislodge part of the beam and managed to pull Kevin free. At 3:24 a.m., both men emerged from a door on the north side, just 30 seconds before the upper floor caved in completely. Thermal imaging records and audio from their helmet mics confirmed the timeline. They were rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital. Kevin's injuries included 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and critical respiratory issues. He remained hospitalized for 2 weeks. Trey, who suffered burns and a concussion, was treated and discharged the next day. Despite violating safety protocols, Trey's actions weren't punished. In fact, footage from his helmet was used during the internal review, which acknowledged the rule breach but recognized that his initiative had likely saved Kevin's life. A February 2018 internal memo stated that the situation involved extraordinary risk under extreme conditions, and no disciplinary action was warranted. Instead, Trey James was honored publicly. On February 6, 2018, at an event held at City Hall, he received the Atlanta Fire Rescue Medal of Valor. Kevin, still healing, made a short but emotional appearance to thank his brother and the department for their support. What happened after that day is where the story takes its darkest turn. The bond forged in fire would soon come under impossible strain, and what followed would leave an entire community stunned. But that's a part of the story we'll dive into next. If you want to hear what led from brotherly heroism to unspeakable tragedy, be sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Trey's place? My brother saved my life. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here. Those were the words spoken by Captain Kevin James months after being pulled from a burning warehouse by his younger brother, Trey. Their story of heroism was widely shared in firefighting circles throughout Georgia, praised in training manuals and trade journals alike. But what began as a tale of courage would, years later, collapse into a devastating personal tragedy, one that no one saw coming. In the months that followed the Murphy Avenue fire, both James brothers returned to duty. Their actions became case studies in publications like Fire Engineering and Firehouse magazine. They weren't just brothers, they were symbols of bravery and trust. By 2019, the two had gone a step further. They launched their own company, James Safety Solutions LLC, a private fire code consultancy based in East Point, Georgia. The firm offered safety inspections, compliance reviews, and site consulting, quickly attracting business from developers across Fulton County. Their reputation opened doors quickly. Within a year, they had secured their first municipal contract. By 2020, they were working with multiple local property firms, appearing regularly at professional conferences and industry events as respected voices in fire safety. On the personal front, the brothers remained deeply connected. Trey had married Melissa Brantley, a trauma nurse at Grady Memorial, in 2011. Kevin stood beside him as best man. The couple soon had two sons, Malik in 2012 and Devin in 2017, and bought a home just down the street from Kevin's on Wellington Street in East Point. The brothers lived 3 houses apart, sharing backyard barbecues, school events, and family holidays. To neighbors and friends, it was an ideal arrangement, 2 close families supported by an unshakable brotherhood. Kevin, still unmarried, was a constant presence in Trey's household. Known affectionately as Uncle Kev, he was there for soccer practices, home repairs, and after-school pickups. But over time, subtle cracks began to form. Friends later recalled quiet moments that felt off. Kevin and Melissa engaged in long private conversations. Sometimes Kevin skipped family events only to reappear suddenly. On occasion, Trey seemed distracted, but no one suspected anything serious. That changed in March 2023. On the 12th, Melissa accidentally dropped her phone in the hospital parking lot. The screen shattered and went dark. Trey offered to help restore her iCloud data to a backup phone he kept at home. During the setup, he noticed something odd. Another Apple ID was listed under their family sharing settings. The name on it, Kevin James. Curious, Trey tapped in. What he found would unravel his entire world. The shared cloud folder contained hundreds of messages, some deleted, many still recoverable. According to digital forensic experts, the messages dated back nearly a decade. The content included explicit texts, audio notes, hotel arrangements, and even voice recordings. Shockingly, the earliest messages began in late 2010, months before Trey and Melissa's wedding. Then came the most devastating piece, a message sent in February 2021. It included a PDF, a lab report from a paternity test. The result named Kevin James as the biological father of Devin, Trey's younger son. The message was sent by Kevin himself. Over the next 2 days, Trey did not speak to anyone about what he'd found. Instead, he got to work. He compiled the messages, photos, voice memos, and metadata into an archive stored on a USB drive labeled smoke damage. He began building a digital timeline, cross-checking the messages with credit card statements, travel logs, and call histories. This wasn't a rushed emotional response. It was methodical. For the next 3 weeks, Trey said nothing. He maintained his daily routines, going to work, attending social functions, even spending time with Kevin and Melissa. To neighbors, he seemed quiet, maybe a little withdrawn, but nothing out of the ordinary. What no one knew was that beneath the surface, Trey had discovered a betrayal that went beyond infidelity. It wasn't just the affair, it was the years of lies, the DNA test. The man who had once risked everything to save his life had also quietly dismantled it. What Trey chose to do next would leave everyone speechless. Subscribe to hear the final chapter of this haunting story. And let us know in the comments, what would you have done? After discovering a secret that shattered his world, Trey James didn't confront anyone, not right away. Instead, he quietly began collecting evidence, driven by a mix of heartbreak and a need for clarity. Over several days, Trey transferred data to a secure USB drive he later labeled smoke damage. On it were over 1,400 messages between his wife, Melissa, and his brother, Kevin, many of them previously deleted but recovered through iCloud syncing. These weren't just casual exchanges. They spanned over a decade and included texts, photos, voice notes, shared locations, and calendar entries. Some were intimate, others were logistical, hotel meetups, travel plans, even medical documents. According to a later forensic analysis by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, the files were organized with meticulous care. Timestamps were preserved, folder names included dates, locations, and subjects. Trey didn't stop there. He began aligning this data with financial transactions, credit card charges, hotel bookings, and phone records. He built a spreadsheet. Each entry detailed where Melissa and Kevin had been, what was said, and what other records confirmed it. By the time investigators reviewed it, there were more than 60 entries, dating back to 2010 and stretching all the way into 2023. The pattern was undeniable. Despite what he'd uncovered, Trey didn't let anything slip. He kept up appearances. Neighbors said he acted like everything was normal. In the following weeks, he showed up at community events and work functions like usual. On March 19th, he brought his sons to a neighborhood barbecue. On March 22nd, he was at a youth soccer game. On the 24th, he participated in a fire inspection downtown. His presence was routine, calm. Records confirmed he remained in contact with both Melissa and Kevin during this time. On March 25th, he even attended a poker night hosted at Kevin's place. One guest later noted Trey seemed quiet, maybe a little withdrawn, but not unlike himself. Behind the scenes, though, something had shifted. On April 3rd, Trey booked a secluded cabin near Lake Sinclair in Putnam County. He reserved it for April 8th through the 10th using his personal debit card. The reservation listed Kevin James as a second guest. 2 days later, he called his brother. The call lasted 4 minutes. We don't know what was said, but we know Kevin agreed to the trip. Trey pitched it as a simple getaway, a break from work, from family responsibilities, just the two of them, like old times. The idea, according to later digital records, was to reconnect. When authorities later searched the cabin, they found fishing gear, firewood, a first aid kit, and a half-empty bottle of bourbon. But they also found something else, an envelope marked "For Kevin when it's over." Inside were printed copies of key messages from the affair, the paternity test naming Kevin as Devon's biological father, and a handwritten letter from Trey. On April 8th, the two men arrived at the cabin, located off Twin Bridges Road, a quiet, wooded inlet often rented for weekend retreats. The property was confirmed unoccupied prior to their check-in at 2:30 p.m. There were no signs of tension that evening. In fact, neighbors staying at another cabin reported hearing laughter and voices on the porch. No arguments, no raised voices, nothing alarming. In the letter Trey had written, he referenced that night directly. One line read, "I always owed you, but I never told you how much I needed you around." The next morning, April 9th at 6:42 a.m., a passing driver spotted an overturned truck in a ditch off Georgia State Route 129, about 8 miles outside Eatonton. Emergency crews arrived minutes later. The truck, a 2016 Ford F-150, was registered to Trey James. It had veered off the road and flipped over. Kevin James was found 12 feet from the vehicle, thrown from the passenger side. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause, blunt force trauma to the head and chest, consistent with high-speed impact and ejection. Trey was still inside the truck, restrained by his seatbelt. He was conscious but disoriented. What happened during that final night is still open to interpretation. Was it a tragic accident or something more? The evidence collected, the timing, and the eerie silence from Trey in the days leading up to the crash all raised deeper questions. What would drive a man to keep a secret that big for weeks and then take one final trip with the brother who betrayed him? Trey James survived the crash, but questions began immediately. Though visibly shaken, he showed no life-threatening injuries and was quickly transported to Oconee Regional Medical Center in Milledgeville for evaluation. When questioned by deputies at the hospital, Trey said it had been a tragic accident. According to him, a deer had darted onto the road, forcing him to swerve. He claimed the vehicle lost traction and flipped into the ditch. But from the moment authorities arrived at the scene, something felt off. There were no skid marks on either side of the highway, no signs that brakes had ever been applied. The crash site offered little evidence to support the story of a sudden stop or evasive maneuver. And it didn't take long for forensic teams to spot the next red flag. The vehicle's data recorder showed only one seatbelt had been fastened, the driver's. The passenger airbag had deployed, but it was pristine. No blood, no hair, no impact evidence. Kevin James, found roughly 12 feet from the truck, had clearly not been restrained. His fatal injuries, blunt trauma to the head and chest, were consistent with being thrown through the windshield during a forward collision at nearly 50 miles per hour. Wildlife officers searched the area and found no traces of deer or other animals. The weather was clear, visibility was perfect. Whatever happened that morning wasn't caused by nature, it was something else entirely. Then investigators searched the glove box. Inside, they found a sealed manila envelope marked in handwriting, "For Kevin, when it's over." Inside that envelope were printed screenshots, hundreds of them, of text exchanges between Melissa Brindley James and Kevin James. There were transcribed voice memos, digital photos, and one item that tied it all together. A printed paternity test report dated February 2021 confirming Kevin James as the biological father of Devin James, Trey's youngest son. At the bottom of a handwritten letter, Trey had written one chilling sentence. "You died in that fire. I kept you alive, and this is how you thanked me." That envelope became the cornerstone of the investigation. The following day, a search warrant was granted for Kevin James's iCloud account. Forensic teams recovered several deleted audio recordings. In one of them, Kevin's voice could be clearly heard whispering, "I tried to stop it, but I loved her. I always have." The voice was verified through analysis software and confirmed by family members. Melissa James was brought in for questioning on April 11th at the East Point Police Department. At first, she denied everything, but when shown the recovered data, she admitted to the affair, one that, according to her, started back in 2010, before she and Trey were married. She claimed the affair had ended before the wedding, but was rekindled in 2015 after the birth of their first child, Malik. What started as emotional support, she said, gradually turned physical. The relationship continued on and off until 2022. Melissa confirmed that the paternity test had been initiated after Trey raised doubts about Devin's resemblance. She had done it privately with Kevin's knowledge. The result confirmed what she feared and what she never found the strength to reveal. Melissa maintained that she never intended harm and described her silence as the result of emotional collapse, not malice. Independent DNA testing later confirmed the truth. Malik James was Trey's biological son. Devin James was not. Kevin's genetic match came back with 99.98% certainty. On April 14, 2023, Trey Donald James was formally arrested and charged with second-degree murder, vehicular homicide, and evidence tampering in connection with his brother's death. The charges were filed in Fulton County after a coordinated investigation involving the Putnam County Sheriff's Office, Georgia State Patrol, and the Fulton County District Attorney. Trey was held without bond. As the case moved into preliminary hearings, prosecutors outlined what they believed was a clear premeditation. They pointed to the April 3rd cabin reservation, the printed evidence pack, and the orchestrated nature of the trip. Crash experts testified that the driver's seatbelt had been the only one engaged. Everything suggested the crash wasn't spontaneous. It was carefully prepared. The trial was scheduled for October 9, 2023, in Fulton County Superior Court, with Judge Marilyn Kinnear presiding. What began as a story of brotherhood, loyalty, and sacrifice ended in betrayal, tragedy, and a man pushed past the edge by the people he trusted most. The medical examiner's report left little room for speculation. Kevin James's injuries were devastating and non-survivable. His body had been ejected from the vehicle without restraint, consistent with a high-speed impact. There was no chance to save him. In the glove box, investigators found a sealed envelope, carefully labeled and clearly intended for Kevin. Inside, printed text messages, a paternity test naming Kevin as the father of Trey's youngest son, and a handwritten letter ending with a chilling line. "You died in that fire. I kept you alive, and this is how you thanked me." That envelope was submitted into evidence without dispute. For the prosecution, it was the heart of their case. Lead prosecutor Michelle Emmons painted a grim picture of motive and intent. This wasn't a crime of passion, she argued. It was a calculated, emotionally charged act born from betrayal and years of internalized pain. Emmons told the court this was not an impulsive reaction, but a silent execution dressed up as a tragic car accident. But the defense pushed back. Trey's attorney, Colin Reeves, presented a different angle, one rooted in psychological trauma. His team argued that Trey's actions were not cold and calculated, but the result of a mental health collapse. According to the defense, Trey had endured years of accumulated trauma throughout his firefighting career, including major incidents like the 2016 East Lake apartment blaze and the 2018 Murphy Avenue warehouse fire, where he had risked his life to rescue Kevin. The defense introduced expert testimony diagnosing Trey with PTSD, claiming the betrayal by his wife and brother triggered a downward spiral. Friends, co-workers, and even a retired fire chief vouched for Trey's character, describing him as calm, dependable, and deeply devoted to his family. Still, the prosecution pressed on. They presented phone records, GPS history, and search data that showed Trey had looked up the route to the remote cabin days before the crash. He'd checked the weather, planned to stay, and gathered evidence in advance. To them, it was premeditation, plain and simple. In closing arguments, Emmons delivered the line that sealed the courtroom. "There is a difference between heartbreak and homicide. Mr. James knew the difference, and he made a choice." After 4 days of testimony and 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous decision on October 17, 2023. Trey Donnell James was found guilty on all charges: second-degree murder, vehicular homicide, and tampering with evidence. Judge Marilyn Kinnear imposed the harshest sentence permitted under Georgia law, 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole. She addressed the court before finalizing the ruling. "This is a tragedy in every direction. One life lost, another condemned, and an entire family left in ruin, not by fate, but by intent." The room remained still. No one spoke, no outbursts, just the heavy silence of finality. Later that day, the Atlanta Fire Rescue Department issued a public statement. It acknowledged the loss of Captain Kevin James and reaffirmed its support for mental health resources within the department. The statement closed with, "This is a loss beyond measure, a painful reminder of what our people carry, on duty and in silence." Trey James is currently serving his sentence at Dodge State Prison in Chester, Georgia. As of early 2024, no appeal has been filed. The case is considered closed. At the sentencing hearing, Melissa Brantley James, Kevin's lover and Trey's wife, spoke briefly. She had no prepared remarks, only a soft voice filled with regret. "I broke something sacred between two brothers. One is dead, the other is gone. I ruined them both." She asked to speak with Trey privately, but the judge denied her request. On November 4, 2023, a private memorial was held for Captain Kevin James. It wasn't open to the public. City officials, family, and fire department members paid their respects. The ceremony focused solely on Kevin's service record, especially his heroic rescue during the East Lake apartment fire in 2016, where he saved 3 children from a burning third-floor unit. There was no mention of how his life ended, only how he had lived.
Trey James's name never appeared in the funeral program. Not a word was spoken about him during the service. By the end of 2023, Kevin James's personnel file was officially closed, and his badge number quietly retired. No ceremony, no announcement. Following the trial, custody of Malik and Devin remained with their mother, Melissa. No legal motions were filed to change guardianship. The Atlanta Firefighters Relief and Charitable Fund established a trust in the children's names, seeded by donations from both colleagues and private donors. The fund is overseen by an independent trustee and restricted to education and medical expenses. In a short interview outside her East Point home in December 2023, Melissa said softly, "My sons are innocent. I'll spend the rest of my life showing them that one mistake doesn't define who they are. They deserve peace, and one day, the truth." The lakeside cabin where the brothers stayed before the crash was sold in early 2024, listed in as-is condition. The roadside crash site on Route 129 is now barely recognizable, marked only by overgrown grass and faint tire impressions. No memorial, no plaque, just silence. Among the items logged into evidence was a partially burned matchbook found near Kevin's body. Inside was a short cryptic message. "Brothers are born in fire, but sometimes fire takes them back." No one knows who wrote it or when. By early 2024, the case known in legal records as the James incident was officially closed. No appeals were filed, all evidence was archived. In response, Atlanta Fire Rescue updated its internal policies, expanding mental health evaluations and formalizing peer support systems for personnel working in high-stress environments. The story ended, but the weight of it lingers.